Here is a sample MMI policy station with an expert response and tips on how to tackle your upcoming MMI.
First, let's quickly go over what an MMI is. MMI stands for multi-mini interview, and it's very common for medical school admissions nowadays. The MMI is a situational judgment test that consists of 8 to 12 stations, including 1 to 2 rest stations. It allows different interviewers to assess your reaction to different questions and scenarios based on real-life situations. Your interviewers might be practicing professionals, faculty members, senior students, or even members of the public. The exact timing will vary from program to program, but MMI stations typically last about 8 minutes. MMI interviewers are instructed to score each applicant relative to all the other candidates they see that day, based on their communication skills, the strength of the arguments displayed, as well as suitability for the profession. Before you enter the interview room, which might be a real room or a virtual one, you'll have about 1 to 2 minutes to look at the prompt and formulate a response. A buzzer will then go off, and then it is your time to enter the room. Depending on the program, you'll have anywhere between 4 and 8 minutes to respond to the prompt, and a buzzer will go off when your time is up. You will continue this cycle until all stations are complete in your MMI. MMIs have various question types that you may come across. These could be your typical scenario, personal policy questions, but you might also come across some task-based or collaboration stations, or even acting stations. As I mentioned earlier, in this video, we're going to go over a sample MMI policy station, and I will be giving you an expert response as well. So here's a question that you may come across, or something similar, if you get a policy question in your MMI. What are your thoughts on the legalization of marijuana for recreational use? Now, we know that this is a policy question because it is asking your opinion on a certain policy or issue. Applicants often assume that their response to policy questions is evaluated based on the side of the issue they choose, but this is actually not the case. MMI policy questions are assessing your understanding and your critical thinking skills of the policies that are being discussed. The interviewer wants to know that you are able to take a non-biased approach, look at both sides of the policy, understand who it impacts, think about it critically, and come up with your own conclusions. To best prepare for policy questions, it is very important that you stay up to date with the latest research and news that is impacting your country, state, or province. This can be hot topics such as mandatory vaccinations, legalization or decriminalization of certain drugs, etc. For policy questions, we do have a recommended structure for approaching these question types. Since you only have about 1 to 2 minutes before entering the room to formulate a response, it's really great that you internalize these structures so that you're able to articulate your thoughts quicker and come up with a strong response. For a policy question, the first thing you always want to do is showcase your awareness. This is where that research behind the scenes comes in handy. So 1 to 2 sentences that shows the interviewer that you understand what the policy is and who it impacts. The next thing you want to do is show the interviewer that you are taking a balanced approach and that you understand both sides of the issue being discussed. So you want to provide 2 to 3 advantages and disadvantages based on who the policy impacts. It is very important that you do this prior to giving your stance to show the interviewer that you are non-biased. Once you've weighed the pros and cons on each side of the argument or the policy, this is when you give your stance and address the prompt at hand. Do you think marijuana should be legalized for recreational use, or do you think it should not? You don't stop here though. Once you give your stance, you want to be proactive. If you agree with the policy, you want to come up with some modifications that address the cons that you discussed. If you disagree, you also want to be proactive and come up with some alternatives to the policy that will address the pros that you discussed. Now that we know the structure, let me read you an example of an expert response to the policy question, do you think marijuana should be legalized for recreational use? The recreational use of marijuana has already been legalized in Canada and a few US states, but there is still much debate on the subject. Some states wonder if the legalization of marijuana is beneficial to the community as a whole, and others are watching to see if it's something they should adopt as well. I could definitely understand why people land on either side of the issue. On one hand, we are talking about a drug that can have short-term effects such as poisoning or overuse of marijuana and long-term consequences like dependency. On the other hand, research shows that marijuana has increased over the past few years and that when handled responsibly, the unpleasant side effects can be minimal. I believe that we should treat it the same way we treat alcohol. We should do our very best to limit its access to adults who can use it responsibly and educate the masses on what marijuana actually is, how it can be used safely, and what side effects it can have. This would allow us to teach more people about the right way to indulge in recreational marijuana. The legalization of recreational marijuana would also have a positive impact on both the crime rate and the economy of the country, as it would take money out of the illegal drug dealers' pockets and put it in the hands of legal business owners who can be monitored by the government to ensure they are following the rules. Now, before we get into why that was such a strong answer, if you had your stopwatches running at home, you probably noticed that I didn't fill up 4 to 8 minutes with my response time. I want to highlight that even in a timed manner, you always want to focus on quality over quantity. There will be some cases where you run out of time, and there will be some cases where you are able to articulate a strong response without using the entire time that is allocated to you. My tip to you in these cases is to not let this stress you out. If you have lots of time left, but you are comfortable with your answer, just get comfortable to being in the silence. Sit with your interviewer, sit in silence, and just reflect on your answer. A lot of mistakes that students make is that they see the extra time they have and they feel the need to fill that time. They start to ramble and it ends up being detrimental to the already strong response that they had in maybe about a 2 to 3 minute time frame. Now that you know what to do in cases of having extra time in your MMI station, let's talk about why that expert response that I read was so strong. For the policy question, you'll notice that it followed the structure that I recommended. So the first 2 sentences were showcasing the awareness of the topic. In this case, it was in regard to the fact that Canada and some states in the US has already legalized marijuana for recreational use. It then moved into a balanced approach. So you'll notice that before even giving the stance, the expert response highlighted pros and cons on each side of the argument. Once they highlighted that and showed the interviewer that they were taking a balanced approach, they moved into their stance and took it a step further to give some modifications to address the cons that they discussed. So in this case, the interviewee giving the expert response was in favor of legalizing marijuana for recreational use, but they didn't finish their response there. They added the modification of ensuring that it is treated like alcohol and making sure that it is limited to educated adults that are able to consume it safely, and also adding the extra step of educating the masses of the effects of marijuana so that they can make an informed decision. As I mentioned before, the interviewer is not grading you on whether you think that marijuana should be legal or that it should not be legal. It is grading you on the strength of your arguments. In this case, the expert response had a balanced approach. They were able to determine everyone who is impacted by the policy and think critically to give a strong conclusion, in this case in favor of legalizing marijuana. It's no wonder why this was a successful response. If you want to learn how to tackle every MMI question that's going to come your way, take a look at BeMo's MMI prep page at the link below. You can also find the link in the description of this video. We can't wait to help you crush your interview and get accepted to your top choice medical school. Stay tuned for more videos just like this one where we will provide expert responses, samples, and tips for all components of your application for medical school or residency. Make sure to subscribe to our channel so that you're in the know as soon as these videos are posted.